Well, hello. So, the Marathon Alpha just ended on May 6th, and I got to play about 80 hours of it. I completed all the priority contracts, I maxed out my reputation with all the available factions, and I got quite a few glorious knife kills. I had a ton of fun with this game, and I can't wait to play more. With that being said, this was an alpha experience, and the game has a ton of things that will need to be completed or changed prior to its launch. So, today I'm going to talk about the biggest pieces of feedback that I have for the game, or the things that I think should change. The first thing that I want to touch on is probably my biggest gripe with the alpha. So when I got to play the game prior to the alpha, about a month or so before the start of this test, there was a terminal screen that included all of the text logs that we were getting for completing the contracts. There's also a sub menu, like a separate kind of computer terminal screen that was very much so in line with the terminals we were getting inside of the ARG. Visually, it looks super cool. I mean, the terminal from the original games was back in a new and improved way that allowed you to go back and review the lore pieces, as well as it seemed like there were the bones of a system that would allow you to hack or access this UESC terminal, like I said, very much like the ARG. And it was one of the things that I feel like really bridged the narrative gap between the original games and the new game. It kind of delivered it in this format that was really consistent and evolved. And so the fact that that wasn't included inside the alpha, at least in some sort of representative way to show people that that was going to be a component of the game or will be a component in the future, I feel like was very misfortunate. I think a lot of the priority contracts, people probably experienced a one and done situation. They're probably focusing primarily on the visual component of Gaius or Vulcan talking to them. And then, once that text was off the screen, there was no way to go back, view it, or anything, which I understand not the main focus of the alpha itself. They're looking at core gameplay mechanics and how to improve the gameplay loop as a whole for the extraction game mode in particular. But I think that a lot of people walked away who haven't been following Marathon or don't know about the original series or the ARG super well, or just know of it very vaguely, and they probably walked away from this thinking that it's going to have a very similar narrative to a lot of the other extraction experiences that are on the market. And I think Marathon really stands out on the basis that there's a whole huge sci-fi world here that has a lot of very carefully crafted thematic elements, and there's a lot of care being put into this world. So the fact that that wasn't brought into the alpha in some way just to show people that the depth of this story is going to be something that kind of stands out within the extraction shooter genre, I think was an unfortunate misstep. Now, once again, I understand that's not what the alpha was testing, but I think at least just showing players an example, an idea of how those systems might operate or how you can interact with them would have been a good decision to give it just another little thing that helps it stand out in the larger extraction genre. The next thing that I want to talk about is the pain system. The pain system is great in the sense that if I'm playing Tarkov, I can't easily communicate to random teammates or other people what exactly I'm looking at without directions, and that obviously falls in line with the realistic milsim kind of aspect of Tarkov, but kind of frustrating on a match-to-match I'm playing a game thing, which I think Marathon resolves a lot of those issues coming from these other milsim extraction shooters. But the pain system, while pretty good and fairly robust, is not accurate at all. If there is a player bag or an item to loot or anything really within like a 20-meter spread of the thing that I'm trying to paint, it's gonna paint the wrong thing. I remember there were multiple situations where I had visual eyes on enemies and I'm explaining to my teammates where they're at, but it's just impossible for me to actually ping them, which is a big component of playing a runner like Blackbird, because they had enemy bags, like I said, like 30, 40 meters in front of them, and so my line of sight was just constantly painting those things. I think either making it contextual in the sense that if I'm in a straight line and there's an object in between me and my subject, maybe just paint both. I don't really see the harm in doing that, but I think if my my reticle is exactly on a player and I try to ping them, I'm utilizing a system within the game. It's going to be frustrating if that red mark does not pop above their head. I think this is probably like a general rework thing that they're pretty aware of, but I think to make it consistent, and especially when you're kind of locked to most of the time playing with two other teammates who, let's face it, you're not always going to have voice comms with, especially with random crew fill. I need to be able to ping things with a level of consistency that is very, very solid. So it's unfortunate that the system as it stands right now leaves a lot to be desired in terms of accuracy. The next thing I want to talk about are the heroes, and this is probably a little bit confusing because they are very gun shy to call them heroes, but from my perspective, that's what they are. We talked about this quite a few times on stream, these kind of larger conversations around people referring to them as classes or runners, or saying that they are or aren't heroes. From my perspective, it seems like they have a visual appearance that's pretty consistent. They have a background, they have kind of character traits that seem consistent. They say certain things, and they have abilities that are locked to their character. So it seems like a hero system, but I feel like Bungie is very gun shy. Maybe Sony is very gun shy as well to calling it a hero shooter or saying that there's hero shooter elements directly because of the whole Concord thing, which is an unfortunate set of circumstances, I imagine, if mid-development on this project, a disaster like Concord happens at Sony. So now I understand that there's probably a level of fear of associating your game with anything that Concord had going on. But I think that the confusing thing for a lot of players is that people were coming in with an expectation that there would be a level of customization to the runners. Now, we can point back at the Vidoc or how they presented the runners within the 2023 ARG and say that they used language that kind of indicates that. I mean, at no point was it directly stated exactly how the customization or the player's characters would be depicted or chosen, or what level of variation you would be able to apply to them, but a lot of people were coming in with this assumption, okay? So I think the fact that they didn't outline the exact kind of parameters of the system in that initial developer update that we had gotten from Joe Ziegler was a kind of misstep. And while I personally don't mind the system that they have, I think that the characters that they have are interesting. I think the backstories are compelling. I think their presentation within the cinematic was very, very well done. I think the voice actors they have are incredibly talented. I think there's a very unique opportunity to tell a story from the perspective of these characters within the world of Marathon that is interesting and compelling to me. And I'm not super attached to this idea that I get to change every little thing about my runner, despite the fact that there were kind of like these modular pouches and stuff like that on the runners that we saw in the 2023 trailer. Like I said, I'm not personally attached to that, but I do think that some of their marketing and language around these things needs to be much more direct. And I think that we're kind of past this idea that they would change that. I don't think that it's necessary for them to change it, and I think at this point it would be such a large step back in development to go back and change a lot of the narrative stuff too that I'm really connecting with. So I don't think that they should do that, but I do think that if they're going to have these characters and they're gonna have backstories and they're gonna have all these things that I outline as kind of being like heroes, then they should lean into that and build stories around these characters. I think that because the way that the narrative is being presented and how your sentience is not really connected to these physical shells, and also there's kind of this larger question about what are these partitioned minds that make up the runners. I mean, there's a lot of room there for them to do some really unique things about what a character is and what a person is and what an AI is, kind of these larger Marathon questions that they've kind of played with for a long time can be expanded upon on these characters. So I don't think that's going to detract from people wanting to tell their own stories and experience their own stories, despite the fact that they might have these kind of common characteristics or traits or whatever. But I do think it's very key that they need to lean into it. I think that if they continue to kind of avoid the language around referring to them as characters or heroes and really like hide behind this in-universe name of runners that they're using, I think that's really just going to pull away from the experience that they're creating. And if people don't connect with it, people don't connect with it. That's entirely up to the audience to decide. But clearly, Bungie has a level of confidence in the product that they're making, and I think that instead of maybe from a marketing perspective being shy about what the actual product is, I think they just need to kind of fully dive into the thing that they're making. Now, I'm sure a lot of people will hear that and go, people are saying they don't want heroes. Why are you saying, for them just do the heroes? Well, I just think that is the game that they made. And like I said, I understand why maybe you might not connect with that idea, but I think the systems that come out of it, the way that they play together, the way that encountering teams works, and the tactical decisions that you're making on the fly based off their abilities, and I think the character presentation is cool. I think these are cool system. The cool systems that clearly the game was designed around, and I just think that the more they kind of pull back from just accepting that and acknowledging that, the more difficult it's going to be for people to buy into that, So I think they should change their language, their marketing around those things, and express them as what they are, because clearly the game was designed around these teams of 3 heroes for all intents and purposes. The next thing is, I think that there needs to be more done to indicate to people what the objectives are on the map. I heard quite a few times via comments and other streamers or content creator people talking about the world feeling kind of empty, or that there's not a lot of activities. And obviously, like I said earlier, this is an alpha experience. They're looking at, the core gameplay loop. They want to see how gunfights feel. They want to think about balancing. They want to address like the core systems that are going to be consistent within the game, not necessarily like how the in-game or mid-game loop even is going to feel for the large majority of players who stick with the game. But I do think that there actually are a lot more activities than people are probably giving it credit for, and I just don't think people were aware of them. For example, when you load into a map, right? So you have your contract that you're doing. That's one objective that you can follow. You have the loot that you could want to get. You have PvP that you could want to do. But also you have the ability to call in these UESC supply drops. So you complete like a little puzzle where you have to find the right terminal to activate, and it calls in to a separate POI or sometimes even the same POI, these UESC supply drops, which will offer you a item that's worth a lot more, and also some other rare materials can come out of that. And this can be like a multi-stage process and multiple POIs. You also have like these boss exfils or exfils where they're going to drop a bunch of purple or higher end enemies on you before you can utilize them. They also have the loot drops, or I'm trying to blank on what they're called exactly, but you ring the dinner bell and this ship, comes down and has rockets off it, and you can't stand too close to it, but everybody knows it's coming, and it might burn you if, and then you got to get the loot, and there's going to be other bots there. Like, that's a separate activity. We also have the incursions, which is when the large UESC ship opens up on top of the map. It unfolds and it has this crazy cool government billboard thing, and it beams down like this purple laser, and you have to wait and fight off loads of enemies there, and then you get access to rare materials or gold items. We have the poison rooms that you have to find a computer, maybe is a better word for it. You have to find a computer and shut down the poison that's in the room, run in there and grab the loot really quick. There's a few other kind of like small in-game stuff that provide like a lot of different objectives, and I think that if you were to probably like add all those up as core things, maybe you can make the argument that some of those aren't as engaging as other systems and other extraction games. But I think just by like sheer numbers, this is probably one of the extraction games that I think has the most like individual things to do per match. I think DMZ probably has a lot of very similar things like this, where there's a lot of separate objectives that you load in, you can see on the map and do, and kind of plan your route that way. But like Tarkov, I don't think has this sheer, number amount of things. Hunt, I don't think has that. So I think that's something unique, and I think it's cool that they're putting them on the map for you to see and plan around. But like I said, the big issue here is that I don't think people are aware of those. I don't think people fully understand it. I mean, even right now, like I said, I can't remember the name of one of the objectives, and I played a significant amount of time, and obviously very interested in the game, and I think that that's a problem. I think maybe offering Cyber Acme missions that are really centered around completing those objectives, where you have to go and engage with each of these systems at least once before you kind of get the access to the larger amount of contracts or factions would be a good idea to introduce people to it. Maybe the incentive also should be kind of elevated, maybe make those a little bit more rewarding or a little more difficult. And, I'm just remembering off the top of my head, like I didn't even talk about the locked rooms, which, you find a key at one POI or one map and then you got to bring it in. Like there's a lot of stuff to do in this game. And I feel like people very fairly made the criticism that it felt kind of empty, but I don't think it's because it's actually empty. I think it's because the way that they're presenting it isn't giving people enough information about how these work or how to access them or even what their names are, despite the fact that the map, by all intents and purposes, is very telling. You can see what items are at certain POIs. You can see where question marks are that an event will be located that you got to investigate, or sometimes, if you see it, it'll even say exactly what the event is by icon. I just think they need to do one more step. Another example would be that, like, the high value targets, which are these kind of red hologrammed off areas where if you go in there, you get damaged and there's like a purple, higher end AI enemy that you have to kill. And then you get access to this box that you like hack to get open. And it has, really good loot inside of that. I didn't realize probably until like the last 3 days of the playtest. Like I said, so we're talking like 60, 70 hours in maybe. I didn't realize what exact item I had to use to not take damage in there. Like I think maybe a contract or two to kind of introduce people to these things would make the experience of playing better and more engaging for people, because I'm assuming most people who played just had no idea what these things were for. It's like I would be more inclined to have approached more of those high value targets if I knew right away or very early on that the OS reboot was required to do that. Because then I would have taken note of that as I'm looting through the POI. Oh, hey, there's 2 OS reboots here. Hey, if you guys find one more, a whole team can pop these. We can hit the HVT on the way to the other POI. I think that those systems would really play into each other and make the game feel much more, alive and really showcase kind of how many objectives and opportunities there are for different kind of play within each match. The next thing I think is pretty obvious, but I'm just going to say it because it is something that I think needs to change. The loot needs to be reworked in a few ways. Materials needed for purchase seem very abundant. So that's like the green base materials that sometimes you need to utilize to buy a backpack or a shield or a weapon within the black market. But you're capped by such a low amount of availability in the black market for those items that it almost feels like it's not worth it. Whereas the SIAC kit, which is just kind of a base kit that you buy for 300 credits, maybe 500 credits, I forget exactly. That gives you 5 shield charges, 5 health charges, and a overrun AR and like a sidearm, right? And some light ammo as well. That is like great bang for your buck, almost to the point where like I would rather just use that, loot 1 POI in a map, and basically get as good of items as I would if I would have spent all those resources in the store. And also, like I said, there's really, I don't think enough of them. I think the shields probably should be like upped to maybe 10 every like 6 hours. And right now I think it's at like an 18-hour timer, and I think that you had the ability to buy 5, for example. So I think doing that would allow people to find a kit or loadout that they really mesh with, and it would keep them in the game longer, as opposed to kind of getting stopped by, I don't really want to load in with like this really low base gear, despite the fact that I actually have spent a lot of time in the game. I do have a lot of materials. I do have a lot of credits. So I think there's a trade-off there that needs to happen. Maybe the items that you need materials to buy, maybe there's a way for you to just purchase the item for more credits and not have the materials. I don't know what exactly, but I think that should be fixed. Also, they need stronger base kits in general available for purchase. The SIAC kits should either be unlimited, probably, to keep people in the game, or progression should unlock base kits from other factions as well. I think that Traxxas kit or a Sekiguchi kit would be really cool. It'd also allow people to kind of align more with their faction. I honestly kind of even would be open to maybe having skins or something applied to the items that you get from those kits, just to kind of represent in-game the faction that you're siding with. And maybe that's something that you upgrade in their tree, and it gives you access to their kind of kit as well. I think that would be very beneficial, and also it would be another way to keep people in the game and find like kind of a lower level kit that maybe they associate with more. I hate the overrun. It got a little bit better when they did the 10% buff, but then I think something that they did maybe with upping the health kind of offset it a little bit. And then when the bots were a little bit harder in the last 2 days, another thing that made it feel just a little too weak for me. Whereas if I could have gotten a Traxxas kit through the upgrade tree, and maybe that came with a SMG like the Bully, I would have been much more inclined to probably run the Traxxas kit, and I would have kind of maybe stayed in matches a little bit longer, or done things other than buy that Syac kit for the 4th time, in a row, especially when I knew I was going to try to get rid of that overrun and pistol as quick as I could. I also think that one gold item, the highest tier item, I think is a prestige item, maybe what they're called. I found one of those. So in 80 hours of play, and I'm doing all of the side stuff. I'm not like a great player. Obviously, I'm getting killed a lot. I'm not the best PvP. I'm pretty regular, pretty standard at the game. But I'm doing all of the events. I'm completing all the priority contracts. I'm doing incursions. I'm doing locked rooms. I'm doing all these things. One gold item for 80 hours, it seems a little unreasonable. Maybe not once I see all of the progression, maybe I would disagree with that, but I think that the feeling of finding a gold item is so cool, and I don't think that it's tied to the fact that I only got one in 80 hours. I think if maybe you cut that into thirds, maybe every 20 hours you would find a gold item, just increase them a little bit, I think would be worth it, especially because I believe both the gold materials, or at least one of the biogenic alloy, was attached to a vault upgrade, which I feel like the vault needs to be significantly bigger anyways, so getting that a little bit sooner would have been pretty beneficial to my overall experience of finding and collecting items. All right, the next thing is the maps. I think that additional maps need to feel way different from Perimeter and Dire Marsh. Perimeter and Dire Marsh are solid core maps that offer a great baseline experience. There are open areas, there's natural areas, there's interior spaces, small and large, there's tunnels, rooftops, verticality. I think Perimeter and Dire Marsh are good maps, and I very much enjoy them. I wish that I was still playing them, because I enjoyed the gunfights I got into in all the POIs, and it was cool. The map knowledge felt satisfying. They looked visually interesting. A lot of great environmental storytelling in a lot of different ways. I really enjoyed the maps, but they are similar in the sense that the POIs are largely equally centered on a circular outdoor map with functional colony structures stemming from the center. Data Wall cuts Perimeter in half in the same way that the Anomaly kind of cuts Dire Marsh in half. I really think that these maps work very well, but there will have to be maps that are wildly different to kind of cut through the long-term monotony that comes with a live service extraction shooter game. I'm talking maps that are huge, fully underground, tick tunnels maybe. I don't know exactly, but something that is both visually and structurally far different from these two core maps, I think are going to be necessary. I'm really hoping that the other map that we've heard of, I believe people have referred to it as Outpost. I've never seen or played anything of that in any pre-alpha test or anything. I'm really hoping that that's very, very different from the experience that we're getting on Perimeter and Dire Marsh. And obviously we've heard about the Marathon map, which does feel like it's very in line with that, but doesn't seem like a map that you're going to be loading into over and over again if you want to kind of change in pace from Perimeter and Dire Marsh, since it's such an in-game focused map. All right, the time to kill. I think it feels good to me, but I think, and hear me out on this, headshots should cut straight to health, or maybe damage some percentage of health at the same time as shields. I feel like in very close engagements, there's a lot of determination of who's going to win based off who has the bigger shield. I don't think it's because the shields are too powerful, although they did pull back the shields and up the health about halfway through the alpha, I believe. I just think that it's a little bit too favorable on the gear, and it pulls back the skill just a little bit. I felt like even if I was nailing someone in the head at very close range, if they had a blue or purple shield and I was not at least matching them, they were going to win the fight, even if they missed some shots. Now, once again, not the greatest player. I'm missing shots. I'm all chill, no skill when it comes to my PvP encounters. But I think a little bit of a reward for these kind of, specific shots in up-close engagements would make it feel a little more viable to take on purple shield teams. I know for a fact, like, and I kind of like this in an extraction shooter, like if you see a geared team, maybe you tactically consider that's not someone we engage with. We kind of stay away from those people. They're going to be very dangerous. But there were a few occasions where it's like, all right, that's a 3-man team of locusts and they all have purple shields. They're going to run us down. They're going to gun us down. And there's not really anything that we can do. I felt like even with the sniper, which might be having some hit registration issues, or I might just be a terrible aim. It was just like, man, really difficult if they were anywhere near us to even have a possibility of winning that fight, even if our team may have been a higher skill level, which we probably weren't given how loaded they were. Also, I want to say I did hear a dev say that they want to cut back on the amount of ammo dropping. I would say that's a bad idea. I think it was in like a Play MA, or maybe Joe Ziegler had said it in the creator Q&A. I don't remember exactly, but I think that having a lot of ammo and ammo being abundant on the maps made people much more willing to engage in fights. And I think that my favorite fights in the game were the ones that were really drawn out, and I was busting a lot of rounds. I mean, like full mags per attempt at even killing somebody. So I liked the idea that it wasn't one of these situations where I was kind of counting my rounds and making sure to stay safe. I like that it was more focused on the tactical nature of how we were choosing to approach the encounter, and also our literal skill, whether or not we're hitting the shots, as opposed to like resource management. I think that the resource management component of the fights is largely coming from the healing items, and that feels a little more realistic and fair to me. Like, how many times can you crack their shields? Those items, like the shield charges, felt much more limited, but I never felt like, okay, I'm completely out of ammo, like I gotta go. Like, I don't think that that would be rewarding, especially because the maps are such a size and it's always teams of 3 and there's so many people on the map. Not that there's like, I guess, a ton. It's not like a battle royale, but it's like if we're fleeing from one engagement, it's like a 70% chance we're going to run into a separate team, or at least hear shots where they're like engaging with someone else at the next POI. And I feel like resource restriction on ammunition would make the encounters less satisfying. Like I said, especially because my favorite encounters were the ones where like we're inside of a POI, like we're on station, right? And there's these kind of hills that are on the border of station, and we're trying to crack each other and fight back and do revives and get people up and, you know, move around on people. Like sometimes that's taking, you know, 5 to 6 minutes. And I like the length of those engagements, and that just, I don't think would happen if the ammo was kind of limited anymore. So I would say stick with the large amount of ammo pools that seem to be on the maps currently. All right, and the final thing is that I believe I heard Joe Ziegler say at some point that they were considering or working on maybe a social space or shooting range. Okay, so from a technical standpoint, I think that the shooting range is absolutely necessary. Getting a feel for a gun without having to risk losing it immediately seems like a quality of life update that falls in line with the mission of the game in general. And while I personally don't think a social space like a hideout or hub is necessary for me, I do think that for whatever reason, this seems to be something that enough people are attached to that it would be worth it to have it ready on launch. And I don't know if that's something they're going to be able to do or pull off, but I think if it's something you're going to add, I really would hope that they would aim to kind of stick that on the launch, because like I said, it just seems like from the abundance of comments that I'm getting, people want a certain level of social interaction within this game. Now, I think they're making something that's really focused on PvP and skill in the extraction game mode. But I think such a large amount of this audience are coming from Destiny, or they're fans of Bungie more generally, or they're playing other games like Tarkov where they have like a hideout and stuff like that. And I just think that it's something that people really want, and I do see the benefits to it, especially if you can chat or look through items, or, you know, utilize a shooting range, so there's like some sort of literal advantage there. And also I think in terms of getting people into the world of Marathon, if you create a space that's compelling and interesting, it'll make them more intrigued about the larger world. So I think they should add in some sort of outside the game space for people to hang out in prior to launch, hopefully. I think this is just about everything. Like, obviously, at the core,
I enjoy the game. I think it's fun. I think that the PvP mechanics are good. I think the story's really interesting. I like the loot that I'm picking up. I like the enemies that we're fighting, and I think there's a lot of ways to expand in very interesting routes, especially with the 4 and in the Svit and, you know, fighting these things. So overall, I like the game. These are the things I would like to see change. Please let me know your thoughts and what you would like to see change if you played the alpha or watch stuff, and I will talk to you guys later. All right.